The invisible barrier that destroyed everything in its path emerged from empty sky on that October morning. No pilot could see it coming. No tactical manual had prepared them for what happened next. 70 feet separated life from death in the waters northwest of Luzon. The distance meant everything. American shells no longer needed to strike their targets directly. They simply needed to get close enough. Japanese intelligence had dismissed the reports as impossible. Their military scientists laughed at captured fragments that suggested electronic components inside artillery shells. Miniaturized radar technology couldn't exist in 1944. The vacuum tubes alone would shatter under artillery acceleration forces. They were catastrophically wrong. Admiral Takeo Kurita's Northern Strike Force approached with complete confidence that October day. His pilots had spent months perfecting techniques that exploited American defensive weaknesses. Time-fused shells created predictable patterns. Conventional artillery left gaps that skilled aviators could navigate. The mathematics of survival had been calculated precisely. American gunners needed direct hits or perfect timing to destroy attacking aircraft. Hit rates averaged 3% against maneuvering targets. Even successful hits often failed to stop determined suicide attacks. Japanese kamikaze tactics had transformed these statistics into strategic advantage. Multiple aircraft approaching simultaneously overwhelmed defensive fire through sheer numbers. Pilots learned to approach during ammunition reload intervals. They coordinated attacks that arrived from different vectors at identical moments. The system worked. USS St. Louis had been sunk by a single kamikaze hit. USS Princeton suffered catastrophic damage when conventional defensive fire failed completely. American ship commanders filed report after report, documenting their helplessness against tactics that seemed to guarantee enemy success. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz received increasingly desperate communications from naval forces who felt defenseless. Traditional anti-aircraft guns achieved inadequate results against pilots willing to sacrifice their lives. The entire Pacific strategy risked stalling as ships diverted resources to defensive measures that weren't working. Japanese military planners celebrated their tactical breakthrough. Intelligence services concluded that American defensive capabilities had reached their technological ceiling. Physical limitations of conventional artillery made significant improvements impossible. Reports from submarine reconnaissance confirmed that American gunners were already employing their most advanced systems. The assessment represented Japan's most devastating intelligence failure of the Pacific War. American scientists had already solved warfare's most complex problem. They had created artillery shells that could think. Dr. Miralay Tuvi led the development team at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory. His engineers faced challenges that seemed impossible given 1940s technology. Miniaturized radar systems needed to survive violent artillery acceleration while maintaining sensitivity to detect aircraft at combat ranges. The specifications documented in classified Navy records revealed revolutionary innovation. Each proximity fuse measured 5.5 inches in length and weighed 2.1 pounds. Inside this compact package sat a complete radar transmitter, receiver, antenna system, and electronic firing circuit. The device operated between 180 and 200 megahertz. Continuous radio waves transmitted from the shell analyzed reflected signals to determine target proximity. When aircraft approached within 50 to 70 feet, the fuse triggered automatic detonation. Vacuum tubes needed to withstand accelerations exceeding 20,000 times the force of gravity during gun firing. Standard electronics would have been destroyed instantly. American engineers developed shock-resistant components using innovative mounting systems and ruggedized tube designs that defied conventional engineering wisdom. The detection mechanism analyzed Doppler shift principles. Changes in reflected radio frequency calculated target distance and closing velocity with remarkable precision. Detonation created lethal fragmentation patterns with 95% probability of inflicting fatal damage on any aircraft within the blast zone. Production required unprecedented industrial coordination. Eastman Kodak manufactured fuse bodies. Sylvania produced specialized vacuum tubes. Western Electric assembled electronic components. Monthly output reached 6 figures by October 1944. American factories produced proximity fuses faster than shells could be manufactured to contain them. Quality control procedures developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories ensured remarkable reliability. Each fuse underwent 17 separate tests before shipment. Shock resistance trials, frequency accuracy verification, and sensitivity calibration eliminated defective units. Field reliability exceeded 85%, extraordinary for 1940s electronics technology. Power sources represented another breakthrough. Miniaturized batteries powered radar systems for the brief seconds between gunfiring and target engagement. Batteries activated automatically upon firing, eliminating external power connections that would have complicated ammunition handling. Security surrounding the technology remained absolute. Ship gunnery officers received basic employment instructions without understanding operating principles. Shells arrived in sealed containers with strict orders that unexploded rounds must be recovered or destroyed to prevent enemy analysis. Japanese military scientists analyzing recovered shell fragments identified unusual electronic components. Their technical assessment dismissed them as primitive guidance systems. Miniaturized radar remained impossible given vacuum tube limitations and power requirements. This fundamental misunderstanding of American technological capabilities would prove catastrophic. The first combat deployment occurred as Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38 faced the largest coordinated kamikaze attack of the Pacific War. Captain Robert Andrews commanded USS Stockton when authorization arrived to employ classified ammunition that had been delivered under maximum security 3 days earlier. Japanese aircraft approached in formations that had proved devastatingly effective throughout 1944. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura led 12 Zero fighters in coordinated dive attacks. His tactics, perfected through months of successful operations, assumed conventional time-fused shells that created predictable defensive patterns. The fatal calculations had accounted for every variable except the one that mattered most. Japanese pilots had trained to exploit gaps in defensive fire patterns. Their attack formations had been planned around assumptions that American shells exploded only upon impact or at predetermined time intervals. At 14:03 hours, USS Stockton's forward battery engaged the incoming formation at maximum range. Fire control radar detected aircraft at 18,000 yards. Gunnery officers waited until targets closed to 12,000 yards before opening fire, following standard procedure for effective shell bursts. The first proximity-fused shell detonated 67 feet from Nakamura's Zero at 14:04 hours. The explosion occurred in empty air with no visible target nearby. Japanese pilots and American gun crews initially felt confused by what they witnessed. Within seconds, Nakamura's aircraft disintegrated from multiple fragment impacts. Shrapnel penetrated his cockpit from impossible angles. The pilot died instantly, killed by metal fragments that had originated from an explosion that seemed to happen in empty space. Combat action reports filed by USS Stockton's gunnery department documented unprecedented results. The first salvo of 12 proximity-fused shells destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft. A 33% hit rate exceeded theoretical maximums for conventional ammunition by factors of 10. Japanese formations expecting to exploit gaps in defensive fire found themselves flying into invisible kill zones that extended far beyond traditional engagement ranges. Radio intercepts captured pilot communications, revealing complete confusion. Shells exploding in air. No targets visible. Aircraft destroyed by invisible barriers. These transmissions, decoded within hours, confirmed psychological impact that exceeded devastating physical effectiveness. Japanese pilots who had courageously faced death in conventional combat found themselves confronting incomprehensible weapons that killed without explanation. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell served as USS Birmingham's Air Defense Coordinator. His after-action report documented systematic destruction of Japanese attack formations that had terrorized American ships for months. Enemy aircraft approached using standard kamikaze tactics. Proximity fuses created overlapping kill zones that made successful attack impossible. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed. 0 American casualties. The mathematical superiority was overwhelming. Traditional anti-aircraft fire required direct hits or precisely timed explosions. Proximity fuses created spherical kill zones around each shell, multiplying effective target area by hundreds of times. Japanese pilots trained to evade point targets couldn't evade volumes of space. Admiral Kurita's Northern Strike Force lost 63 aircraft to proximity fuse engagements by 1430 hours. Not a single kamikaze reached its target. Japanese radio communications monitored by American intelligence revealed growing panic among surviving pilots who reported supernatural defensive capabilities. The tactical revolution was complete. Proximity fuses had transformed anti-aircraft warfare from precision timing games to systematic area denial. Japanese kamikaze tactics, developed specifically to overwhelm conventional defenses, became suicide missions with 0 probability of success. Squadron leader Yoshio Tanaka provided testimony during post-war interrogations that revealed complete breakdown of Japanese tactical confidence. He was one of few survivors from the October 14th engagement. His account documented terror these weapons inspired among pilots who had previously shown exceptional courage. "We approached as we had dozens of times before," Tanaka testified. "Our formations were perfect, our timing precise. Then aircraft began exploding in empty air. No shells struck them directly. No timing seemed involved. It was as if the sky itself had become hostile." Japanese naval intelligence initially dismissed pilot reports as combat stress reactions. Captain Minoru Genda, Chief Operations Officer for Admiral Ozawa's carrier force, filed reports stating that proximity explosions were impossible, given known limitations of electronics technology. Intelligence failure compounded tactical disaster. Captured Japanese documents from November 1944 revealed widespread demoralization among kamikaze units. Pilots who had volunteered eagerly for suicide missions began requesting reassignment. The psychological foundation of kamikaze tactics collapsed when missions became certain death with 0 success probability. American naval commanders documented unprecedented changes in Japanese behavior. Admiral Raymond Spruance noted in his November operations report that Japanese aircraft avoided engagement entirely rather than pressing attacks. This represented complete reversal of Japanese tactical doctrine that emphasized aggressive action regardless of odds. Imperial Navy headquarters analyzing mounting pilot losses with no corresponding American casualties began questioning fundamental assumptions about defensive warfare. General Yoshijiro Umezu, Army Chief of Staff, received reports that American technology had achieved capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. Medical records from Japanese naval hospitals documented increasing cases of combat stress among surviving pilots. Unlike traditional combat trauma, these cases involved pilots who reported feeling helpless against weapons they couldn't understand or counter. Navy psychiatrists struggled to treat aviators who described fighting ghosts and invisible barriers. The technology's secrecy amplified psychological impact. Japanese intelligence services unable to capture intact proximity, fuses developed increasingly desperate theories about American capabilities. Some reports suggested magnetic fields that could detect aircraft. Others proposed radar-guided bullets. All missed the actual technology by wide margins. American psychological warfare specialists recognized the opportunity. Radio broadcasts to Japanese forces hinted at invisible defensive barriers and automatic sky mines that made attacking American ships suicidal. These propaganda efforts, based on genuine technological superiority, proved devastatingly effective against Japanese morale. Broader strategic impact became apparent by December 1944. Japanese naval aviation, the service branch that achieved Pearl Harbor and dominated Pacific skies in 1942, effectively ceased offensive operations against American naval forces. The weapon that killed through proximity had created psychological distance that Japanese forces couldn't bridge. Military analysts from multiple nations studied the technology's decisive role in neutralizing Japanese kamikaze tactics after the war ended. They recognized that electronics had fundamentally altered the mathematics of aerial combat. The weapon demonstrated that technological superiority could overcome numerical advantages and tactical innovation when disparity became overwhelming. Post-war testimony from Japanese military leaders confirmed the weapon's strategic significance. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, former commander-in-chief of the Combined Fleet, acknowledged during Allied interrogations that proximity fuses made our aviation tactics obsolete overnight. General Curtis LeMay noted that the technology saved thousands of American lives by ending kamikaze effectiveness without requiring invasion of Japan. Industrial implications proved equally significant. American proximity fuse production reached 22 million units by war's end, demonstrating manufacturing capabilities that Japanese industry couldn't match. Each fuse represented integration of university research, private industry innovation, and military requirements. Coordination became the model for post-war defense development. Dr. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, wrote in his 1945 final report that the proximity fuse exemplified how scientific research could be rapidly translated into decisive military advantage. The technology influenced military doctrine for decades. NATO forces during the Cold War developed proximity-fused surface-to-air missiles based on principles established in 1944. Modern air defense systems still employ proximity detection, though using digital processors instead of vacuum tubes. The fundamental concept of creating kill zones around projectiles remains central to contemporary anti-aircraft warfare. Educational institutions preserve extensive documentation of proximity, fuse development, and deployment. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History displays original fuses alongside testimony from both American developers and Japanese survivors. Contemporary military historians recognize proximity fuses as representing a watershed moment in warfare evolution. Professor John Lewis Gaddis of Yale University notes that the weapon demonstrated how industrial capacity combined with scientific innovation could overcome traditional military virtues of courage and tactical skill. The weapon's effectiveness in reducing American casualties while decimating Japanese forces illustrates moral complexity of technological warfare. Some argue that superior technology reduced overall casualties by ending conflicts more quickly. Others question whether technological dominance creates unfair advantages in warfare. Modern precision munitions trace direct lineage to proximity-fuse innovations. GPS-guided shells, radar-seeking missiles, and automated defensive systems all employ proximity detection principles pioneered during World War II. Miniaturization techniques, developed for vacuum tube electronics, became foundations for transistor technology and eventually microprocessor development. The Battle of Leyte Gulf stands as testimony to proximity fuse effectiveness today. The engagement where Japanese kamikaze tactics met American proximity fuses marked the end of Japan's naval aviation threat. Japanese pilots had perfected suicide tactics that seemed unstoppable against conventional defenses. American scientists had created invisible barriers that made those same tactics suicidal, with zero chance of success. The lesson remains relevant for modern warfare. Victory belongs not necessarily to the brave or the numerous, but to those who can make the impossible suddenly possible. Technology had transformed mathematics of survival in ways that courage alone could not overcome. The sky that had belonged to Japanese pilots in 1942 became an electronic killing field by 1944. Proximity fuses proved that the most devastating weapons are often the ones enemies never see coming.